I love a good four-wheel drive discussion, don't you? Well, here's one for you. A sharp-eyed commenter on YouTube reacted to the idea that I present the Ineos Grenadier as an exotic and asked and said, well, in fact, I'll read it to you. He said, but you were driving what looked like a G-Wagon. Are the parts easier to get there? Thanks, Overlander.
I am Andrew St Pierre White, explorer, overlander and broadcaster with over 40 years driving 4x4s. In association with the Overland Workshop.
I really do love a good discussion. It's like I feel as if I'm around the campfire with you guys and I'm arguing a point. He makes a very good point.
You've made it too expensive, too complicated, and you put a BMW engine in it. It's an exotic.
And anyone could look at that video and say he's being a hypocrite. G-Wagon's an exotic. It is an exotic, absolutely. But you must understand that that was 24 years ago. I have been learning this overlanding thing for over 40 years, and that was part of my learning, and it was part of why I still think Ineos is an exotic, and I want to explain myself a little clearer. I share this kind of thing in-depth look at overlanding and all of the different elements of it on my program called Overland Workshop, where I have gathered some of the world's most experienced overlanders and got them to likewise share their years, decades of experience in one platform that you can download. So if you're interested in learning the in-depth stuff of overlanding, that's where you need to go. Ineos Grenadier. What I mean by exotic, now you could rightfully say, well, all vehicles are becoming exotic in that they're becoming more complicated, they're becoming more difficult to service in the wilderness, and that is an absolute truth, and it's unavoidable. But it is not, it's actually not unavoidable. You buy an old car and then spend a lot of money getting it right, like I've done with the Africa Land Cruiser. 500,000 kilometers on it. If you missed that series, that is quite a story. That is an old Land Cruiser. It has no ECU at all. It doesn't beep ever. It is a basic Land Cruiser, and that's a 2015 troop carrier. That is the least exotic vehicle you can probably still get today, in reasonable condition, but it needed a lot of work. It had 500,000 kilometers on it, as I said, which meant that I needed to spend quite a lot of money. But what I've got in the end is the very opposite of exotic. I've got an off-road overlanding car that performs well, and that if I do have an issue and need spare parts, because of what it is, it's very, very easy to do. My Namibia trips, I did them in my early days in my Range Rover. An easier vehicle to work on, it's not possible to imagine. Then I did some trips in my Land Rover 110. Equally simple. I did trips in my G-Wagon. Not simple. If I had had an ECU problem or an electrical problem with that vehicle, I would have been in trouble. I had no issues with it. But the truth is that I didn't keep the vehicle for very long because, and this is the nub of what I'm talking about, when I was in Namibia with my G-Wagon, I had this little knot in my stomach. What if something goes wrong? I don't have the knowledge, understanding, skills with diesel that I had with petrol, and it's by comparison to other vehicles I've owned, a complex car.
Here is yet another example. In 1998, I bought a 2-year-old Range Rover. It had air suspension. I did one remote trip, worried every single day about the vehicle, and sold it. Because as nice and wonderful as it is, it was an exotic.
Now, you take that old G-Wagon. I love that G-Wagon. I still loved and that was a 461 series, so it's not the 463 blingy series. I can't stand blingy G-Wagons because they've ruined something that is amazing. And the amazing G-Wagons were 460 and 461 series because they were basic. They were simple. The 290 GD that I owned was one of the most complex iterations of the 461 series. I would own one today because they're such nice vehicles, and I would do overland trips in them, but they would be short and they would be with other people. I wouldn't be comfortable doing solo trips. I did a solo trip in my Africa Land Cruiser last year, and it was magical. And even though a vehicle was very old, we didn't do a lot of work on the engine, just really maintenance work on the engine, more than refurbishment work on the engine. We changed important things like water pumps, and it's all in the videos. So I wasn't too worried about reliability, but I especially wasn't worried about if I had a problem, could I go somewhere for help? That's a very, very important thing when overlanding in remote places. Who can I go to for help? If I am in a convoy, then that I'm going to be less dependent upon that, but not independent of that, because I've been in a convoy where a vehicle, and it was a Land Cruiser, okay, it broke down, and it was a wheel bearing failure, and it was due to lack of maintenance, nothing more, pure lack of maintenance. He cooked the front wheel bearing. With one other chap, we stripped the entire hub down, took it apart, we sent somebody for spares. It took one day for somebody to drive to a town to get some wheel bearings, and we put it on the vehicle, and it cost us 2 days, just 2 days, for a major failure. Now imagine that situation in something like a Grenadier. Wheel bearings. Okay, well, we can't guess, and because the 105 wheel bearings that we needed to replace are exactly the same as several other Toyota solid axle vehicles, we had quite a good chance of getting one quite fast. If it had been my G-Wagon in 2000 in Namibia up in Overland, and we went to the same place, very, very remote, wow, I would have been, it's why I didn't keep it. And it's why I have gone from the Land Rover to the Toyota. Yes, they're more reliable, but actually more importantly is that you can find spares and support anywhere. I did trips in remote parts of the world in a number of different vehicles, but none do I feel more comfortable with than the Land Cruisers, and for those two reasons. There's a story, and there's a perfect story of the exotic, and this is what I mean when I say Grenadier is an exotic. In about 2015, somewhere around there, and I think it was 6 G-Wagons set off to do the infamous Canning stock route. I have done it twice, and these were exotics. The trouble is that, from what I understand, the leader of the group was in I think it was a 290 GD, it might have been a 300 GD, but anyway, it was a 461 series. It was the basic spec Mercedes. And they are fantastic cars, incredibly strong, really, really well built, except maybe for the clutch. The clutch is quite small and is one of the few weak points of that car. But the point is, it's a good off-road vehicle, and it's quite simple and reasonably easy to work on when compared certainly to modern vehicles, and far easier to work on than the 463, the luxury G-Wagons that went on the trip as well. Every single one of the visitors' vehicles broke, without exception. And just by walking around the vehicle, an experienced overlander will be able to say, you have to be kidding me. You're doing what with that? Not because it was a G-Wagon, but because it was the way it was equipped. They had 19 and 20 inch wheel rims, which means low profile tires. Shoot me now. And they went on the trip. I understand, and certainly my G-Wagon came standard with Bilstein shocks. You can't get a better shock anywhere. Well, you can get as good as shocks now. In the old days, my early Land Rovers and Range Rovers, I fitted Bilsteins. Best shock in the shop, they were amazing. They would last the entire life of the car. These vehicles, their shocks, including Bilsteins, broke. Tire failures, constant tire failures. They had so many failures that they had to find spares. So where do you find spares in outback Australia? Towns, in terms of the Canning stock route, are several days' drive away. In the middle of the Canning stock route, you're talking a week's drive away, a whole week to drive to a town that might or might not have some spares. In Australia, G-Wagon spares, you'll get them in the major cities only, which means the only town in all of Western Australia where you will find those G-Wagon spares, if you are lucky, because there are very few Gs around, Perth, nowhere else. Which is, again, a logistical nightmare. So what they did, obviously had lots of money, they organised an aircraft to find the spares. They probably got them in Perth, or they certainly would have got them somewhere in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, the big centres, and flew them in to the Canning stock route where they repaired the cars, and they all managed to finish. And it was actually quite amusing because at the time Mercedes-Benz they were going to do a press article about this, and they had the words "mission accomplished" in the magazine article, and the Overlanders here in Australia just laughed and just said, "Mission failed, mate, you failed." I took in 2022, and if you're interested in Land Rovers, you're going to love this show. It's called the Friends Across the Canning. We took a 47-year-old Range Rover and we crossed the Canning. And yes, we had some mechanical difficulties, but nothing major. And at the time, I had asked Ineos Australia, would you like to send a vehicle with us, because we'll just take a vehicle with us. And they declined. To be fair, they declined because they weren't ready. But I know for a fact that the people at Ineos in the UK, or wherever they're based now, France, whatever, knew about Canning stock route, knew about the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon failure, and thought, the last thing we need is that kind of press. Because if it does fail, well, what spares are we going to take? The vehicle was very young. They didn't know its weaknesses. Nobody knew its weaknesses. Yes, they'd done lots of testing and everything and ironed out, obviously, many of them. But you can only test a vehicle properly by actually giving it to the hands of customers who come back with issues and suggestions and hopefully complaints, and not hopefully all yes men saying how wonderful the car is. They learn nothing from you if you tell them how wonderful it is. Tell them what's wrong with it. Even if the thing that you see is wrong with it is quite minor, tell them, because they'll learn. And I think, this is my gist with Ineos, is that they're a small organisation and they will be able to sort out an issue with the car quite quickly. This is where they are completely unlike anything remotely Land Rover, who would not do anything ever. They didn't have the machinery in their organisation to be able to listen and act on customers' requests. It didn't exist. It probably still doesn't exist. All right? But my guess is in Ineos, it does. The Grenadier has been a huge temptation for me because it's such an interesting vehicle. And I've said before, it does have some weaknesses. All vehicles have weaknesses. Can you deal with the weaknesses? One of the weaknesses with Grenadier is that it's now what I call an exotic. If you now understand what I mean by exotic, you cannot argue the fact that it's an exotic. It is. But now deal with that. Deal with the fact that it's an exotic, and it might serve you absolutely brilliantly. But I'm saying for my use, and this is what I was saying in the video, for my purposes, I like doing solo trips, one vehicle, one bloke in a truck, and extremely remote. I don't think it's right for me. Also, the fact that my Land Cruiser, both of them, have been equipped so well in a way that you could not possibly build a Grenadier with the live inside outside scenario, with the huge fuel tanks that I can carry 1300, 1400 kilometers standard on a tank before I have to carry anything. I can build water tanks underneath, there's space for water tanks underneath, and my camping scenario provides me with a camp I can set up in 90 seconds, and I'm not exaggerating. In fact, sometimes it's even less than that, and with that I have a place to sleep, I have an awning, I have hot water, I have ice cold beers, and one of them is in my hands, and 90 seconds. To pack it away, 3 minutes. To pack everything away. See, I have adapted a vehicle that I believe to be the ideal overland, two-person overland vehicle, not because it's a Toyota Land Cruiser. That's a bonus because the Land Cruiser is so well known, and in terms of being an exotic, it's the opposite of an exotic, right? Even though now the new Troopies, the 2.8 Troopies, are becoming more and more complicated, and in terms of their engine and gearbox, far less easy to service and maintain and repair than they used to be. That's happening. It's unavoidable. Even with the Land Cruisers we love, because of their simplicity, are becoming more and more complicated. And you must forgive me, Ineos owners. The reason why I keep having a go at Ineos is because you didn't do what you promised to do. Sorry, I keep going on about this, but I'm annoyed at you. You promised to build a Land Rover Defender. The old Defender. What was the old Defender? It was the furthest thing from an exotic. If you had, I'd be probably building one to try and get that to match the performance of my Land Cruiser in terms of an overland platform. It would never be able to match it in terms of the ease of getting spare parts. Forget it. Never. But it has a lot of other things going for it as well. And I think the G Grenadier is a great car. It's fabulous. But it's an exotic, and that's my challenge with it. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my, it's a bit of a one-sided discussion. If you were around me around the campfire, we would be having a discussion more than a monologue, but that's not possible, so until the next time.
There are few things more rewarding, inspiring and fulfilling in life as discovering the world's remote places in an all-terrain vehicle. I've been doing it since I was 12, and in my own vehicle since I was 21. In 2013, I teamed up with kindred spirit Paul Marsh to set off deep into the Kalahari to make a series of overlanding training videos.
Right, tyres.
We called it the Overland Workshop. Since that time, the Overland Workshop has evolved into a collection of some of the world's most experienced overlanders contributing to the courses.
We've seen how versatile and fabulous dehydration is.
Just plug them in and out 20, 30, 40, 50 times. They are self-cleaning.
And sharing decades of experience with the world's overlanding communities.
Fifth one we've seen. Burnt out, turned upside down, and one hell of a fire.
Day 6 of the build, and we're getting quite close to starting the engine.
Worst scenario if you had to replace it or rebuild it.
A combined 70 years and over 2 million kilometers of overlanding experience has been combined in one place. The Overland Workshop.
First thing, he looked at me in the eye and he said, "I want to search your car."
Looking at how can we access all the equipment quite quickly. Equally, once I get onto the busy road, I want to remove this because I need good airflow through here. Would I change the water pump? It's working fine. Why should I bother?
The Overland Workshop offers 10 courses, building and kitting a four-wheel drive Overlander, Overland operations, choosing a four-wheel drive, what will be best suited to your overland aspirations, a guide to reconditioning an older four-wheel drive for touring, mechanical preparation and maintenance of an Overlander, DC wiring installations, a step-by-step guide, the off-grid and expedition pantry.
So like I said before, we've established how much energy do I use per day.
So what I suggest is get a piece of paper and you put some columns down. Make yourself a little set of columns, least flexible, most flexible.
Your overlanding dreams are waiting for you.